Asatoma Sadgamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrittorma Amritam Gamaya Abhirabhirma Yedhi Rudrajate Dakshinamukam Tinamam Pahinityam Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through and guide us evermore with the loving presence. Om, peace, 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 control. Friends, we are very happy that this morning we have a guest speaker, Pravrajika Brahmaprana. She is the in charge of Vedanta Center in Dallas. I knew her from 1971. She was a student at that time in Santa Barbara. Then she joined in the convent in 1973. She is a disciple of Swami Prabhupada. So I lived with the monks and nuns in Hollywood and Santa Barbara for 7 years, so I knew her very well. She is a good writer and a very loving and gentle person, very friendly, she very nice person. So I am very glad that she is visiting our center. And this morning her subject is the magic of storytelling. Pravrajika Brahmaprana.
Good morning, everyone. I'll open with a chant. Om Dyo Shantihi Antariksham Shantihi Prithvi Shantihi Apa Shantihi Oshadaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantihi Vishvedeva Shantihi Brahma Shantihi Sarvam Shantihi Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantireti. Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. Om. May there be peace in heaven, in the sky, on earth, in the water, in the plants, in the trees, in the gods, in Brahman. May there be peace in all. May that peace, real peace, be ours. So friends, it's a real delight and honor to be here. I haven't seen Swami since 2015 when he came for the Dallas Center opening, the inauguration of our new building there. And so it's just wonderful to have his holy company and the holy company of my brother monks, and to be with you all and to see this beautiful center. So today's talk, as Swami mentioned, it's the magic of storytelling, how to learn from stories and how to transform our story. So let's begin by asking, what is it about stories that universally captivate us? When we were children, when we are children, our parents told us bedtime stories, which we loved. And as children, our toys came alive for us. And to further animate our make-believe world, we invented stories to interact and engage with our toys. We learn from them how to model being a mother when playing with our dolls, how to be brave like our dad and fight imaginary fires when we played with our toy fire trucks, or to be adventurous and travel to far-off lands with our toy train set. As adults, we also love stories. Stories have a clear structure, a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have a purpose, whether instructive or entertaining. Stories draw out and appeal to our deepest emotions. They ground us, uplift, and teach us. They can also warn, frighten, and surprise us. No matter what our age, stories transport us. They engage our imagination, and we as listeners become immersed in them and integrate our own ideas and experiences into the stories we hear. We make them our own. So how does this happen? Something actually transpires in our brain that makes stories take such an effect. There are 4 things. First, there's what is called neurocoupling. A story activates parts of the brain that allows us, the listener, to turn the story into our own ideas and experiences. Neural coupling. Then there is what is called mirroring. During storytelling, listeners also begin to experience similar brain activity as their fellow listeners. So that's what's going on now, as well as to the storyteller. So we're all sharing the same vibration. The listener's neurons fire in the same pattern as the storyteller, as though the story is happening to the listener. A third thing is dopamine. The brain actually releases a chemical dopamine into our system when we experience an emotionally charged story. It gives us a feeling of well-being. And that is what makes it easier to remember the story with greater accuracy. And finally, there is what is called cortex activity. When processing facts, 2 areas of the brain are usually activated, what is called the Broca's and the Wernicke's area. An engrossing story engages a number of areas of the brain, including the motor cortex, our movement, the sensory cortex, our senses, and the frontal cortex, the creative assimilation of new ideas. So that is all going on when we are hearing stories. Stories serve a spiritual purpose in the world's religious traditions. Many faith traditions have an oral tradition. In college, I first came into contact with Vedanta. I was agnostic at the time, and the beauty was that in the 1960s, in college in Los Angeles, it was during the Great Church Exodus when 2/3 of Christians and Jews left their congregations. It was a period of doubting authority. It was a period of the Vietnam War and also corruption in the church itself. And I myself was an agnostic. But when our college professor said we are going to the Vedanta temple to meet the spiritual grandson of Ramakrishna, we had been reading about Ramakrishna in Houston Smith's book, The Religions of Man. And Houston Smith was the first president of the Vedanta Society here in St. Louis, and one of the great philosophers of the 21st century, of the 20th century. So I came into contact with Swami when I walked into the temple. Being an agnostic, here was a holy man, a genuine holy man, and I knew that religion was true. just from looking at him across from where I was standing. And so I moved from Los Angeles to Santa Barbara to be closer to him. He was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, and he was soon to become my guru. In the early 1970s, he would visit the Santa Barbara Center twice a month and stay 5 days at a time. Swami would take all of his meals at the convent, and so I was able to associate more closely with him. I could listen to his conversation, his humor, and a natural flow of spiritual anecdotes and teachings which he gave throughout the day to nuns and close devotees who would come to visit or take a walk with him or have lunch with us. On the weekends, there would be 25 people at our lunch table in the convent. Every summer, senior monks of the Ramakrishna order would come to Santa Barbara to visit Swami Pravrajika, and their interactions with him in the convent living room or at mealtime brought out an intimate level of spiritual conversation. But it was the evenings after Arati that I cherished the most. And if you've ever been to the Santa Barbara Center, you'll know that it's up in the National Forest on the side of a mountain and 10 minutes from the Pacific Ocean. It's beautiful. It's on 50 acres. And if you stand on the temple steps, you can look out at the Channel Islands and you can see the twinkling lights of Santa Barbara in the evening. So it was the evenings that I cherished most. My first year at the convent, I was a student, allowed to stay there and finish my last year of college. It was after Arati. At that time, the nuns would gather in the convent living room and bring their knitting, their crocheting, their preparations for ghee lights. And a senior nun would read from the Gospel of Ramakrishna. And Swami Pravrajika would sit in his big leather chair with a foot ottoman, and he would reminisce about Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, and the direct disciples of Ramakrishna he had met. Stories that had never been published. This was an oral tradition. Those evenings were so intimate and the spiritual atmosphere so palpable. I was altogether thrilled and staggered to think that I was a witness to such a rare and priceless opportunity. At those times, I remember thinking, my God, I'm within the orbit of an incarnation of God, whose sacred stories are being handed down and shared by a disciple of one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And still, we all are very close to an incarnation of God. So it was those evenings that made me a nun. What was the magic of those stories? They were reminiscences of spiritual giants, rare treasures, shared only at that time by word of mouth. And I began to keep a diary of those stories. One such story was about Swami Premananda, direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And in Swami Pravajananda's own words, I'd like to share that story with you. In Benares, Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, used to ask Swami Premananda to take me with him to the Ganges for a bath, and then to the Vishwanath and Annapurna temples. We went every day for a month. In the crowd, Swami Premananda would hold my hand and draw me after him. When he did that, what a thrill I got. First, we'd bathe in the Ganges. Then he'd change his cloth. I would wash his wet cloth and carry it, and carry his towel and vessel of Ganges water. I used to follow Swami Premananda, Swami Pravrajika reminisced, and would take the mud from his footprints and put it on my body. I had such reverence for him. He was an Ishvarakoti, one of the 6 Ishvarakotis of the Ramakrishna incarnation. Those were the days, he said, to walk with gods. Before Swami Premananda entered the Vishwanath temple, he would buy some flowers. Then we would enter the temple. After he bathed Lord Shiva, the linga, he would give me the water pot, and I would pour water to bathe Lord Shiva. Afterwards, as is the custom, we used to circumambulate the shrine. Next, we used to go to the temple of the Divine Mother, Annapurna. One day, as we finished the worship of Mother Annapurna, Swami described, the head priest of the temple, who knew Swami Premananda, placed a garland of marigolds around the Swami's neck. Swami Premananda's color was beautiful. I have never seen any Hindu with such golden skin. When he wanted to take the garland off to give it to me, Swami related, I said to him with folded palms, "No, Maharaj, please keep the garland yourself. You look so beautiful." The word beautiful reminded Swami Premananda of God's beauty, and he went into ecstasy. His face flushed, and his mind became completely indrawn. A light emanated from his whole body. It was just like an electric bulb lighting up. Walking slowly, Swami Premananda left the temple, and I followed him. The temple lane of Vishwanath was crowded, but on both sides of us, people stared at him and made way. It was evident that everyone present saw his transfiguration. We continued to walk through the streets of Benares while crowds stood still, silently watching Swami Premananda. His eyes were cast down. He was absorbed in the thought of God and completely oblivious of his surroundings. It was about a mile from the temple to the monastery. When we came to the ashrama gate, Swami Nirbharananda, the abbot, saw us from the veranda. He called out, "Boys, prepare a royal welcome for Swami Premananda." We entered the monastery grounds to the sound of gongs, bells, and conch shells. When we arrived at the veranda of the ashrama, Swami Premananda took the garland off and placed it on Swami Nirbharananda. Then he danced, still in ecstasy. Slowly his mind regained external consciousness, and the divine light disappeared. Such stories brought home to me the tangible truth of religion, not as dry theology of do's and don'ts, but the magic of spirituality and spirituality alone. Spiritual stories are the touchstones for us. And these incidents in an avatar's life can serve for us to illustrate the Upanishadic teachings like no other examples. Why? Because the avatar and his disciples are living scriptures. For us, when we come into Vedanta, we ask, what is God? And we hear or read, it is Brahman. But how can we wrap our heads around such a lofty principle? How can we connect with it? We can turn to the famous Upanishadic story when a student went to a teacher and asked to be taught the truth of Brahman. 3 times he asked. Finally, the Guru answered. I have been teaching you all this time. His name is silence. But again, what does that mean? This truth of Brahman seems so nebulous. However, if we turn to Sri Ramakrishna's life, we find incidents that exemplify this great truth, and that brings it home for us. We own that truth. Sri Ramakrishna, we read, tried and failed many times to explain Brahman to his direct disciples. He said, "Today I'll tell you everything. I'll keep nothing secret." And he described clearly the chakras and the corresponding experiences up to the heart and the throat. Then he pointed to the sixth center between the eyebrows and said, "When the mind reaches this point, one gets the vision of the Paramatman, the Supreme Self, and enters samadhi. Only a thin, transparent veil intervenes between the individual self and the Supreme Self. One then sees." As Sri Ramakrishna attempted to provide details of the experience, he went into samadhi. When the mind came down a little, he tried again. And again he went into samadhi. Then, after several fruitless attempts, tearfully he said, "I sincerely wish to tell you everything, but the mother won't let me do so. She keeps closing my mouth." Such life stories of the avatars and their direct disciples provide consolations and examples to live by. Once a devotee of ours in Santa Barbara was harassed by a bossy manager over minutiae in the workplace. This happens, I understand, even today. And the boss was so demanding, the devotee became desperate for the end to such a miserable plight. But one day, she remembered how Hazra and Hridoy, Sri Ramakrishna's nephew, used to boss and torment Sri Ramakrishna, and that gave her great comfort. She thought, if such an unfortunate set of circumstances could happen to an avatar, then I too can learn to live with it, just like Sri Ramakrishna, and learn to rise above it. When visitors would come to Dakshineshwar, seeking Ramakrishna's company, we read how Hazra would say, "Why do you want to see him? Sit here and I will tell you all about God." In fact, he used to ridicule the master's teachings altogether. But Sri Ramakrishna bore it even-mindedly, without losing his spiritual balance. On the other hand, Hridoy, Ramakrishna's nephew, who served him well in the beginning, later became so egotistic and abusive to the point where Sri Ramakrishna thought of leaving Dakshineshwar for Benares. But eventually Hridoy, we read, was dismissed by the Dakshineshwar temple proprietor. A second example, once there was a young woman devotee who was mesmerized by a male devotee's sports car. This happened in Santa Barbara again, and was often seen taking a drive in it. Devotees were a bit scandalized by the young man's intentions and went to Swami Swahananda, who was Swami Prabhavananda's successor. What was the Swami's response? Sri Ramakrishna's example. He called the woman devotee to him and explained. Once Sri Ramakrishna had the desire to smoke a hubble bubble and wear an expensive shawl. He said to himself, this is what is called wearing an expensive shawl and smoking a hubble bubble. Then he gave them away. By following his example, the Swami said to the young lady, go ahead and ride in the sports car once or twice and try to understand what it means to ride in an expensive sports car. then give it up. The experiences of the avatar provide us with a spiritual compass. We're not fooled by false piety or outer renunciation. Swami Pravrajika said, at one time a millionaire who had lost his wife came to the monastery and said he wished to renounce the world and give all his wealth to the Ramakrishna mission. Swami Premananda reported this to Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, and he folded his hands and said gently, "Brother, a worldly man who associates with a holy man like yourself naturally becomes inspired by the ideal of renunciation. Shall we in our turn become worldly because we have met a worldly man?" Maharaj refused to accept the money because he knew very well that the millionaire would later regret his offer, being as he was very much attached to his wealth. Moral stories cross cultural boundaries and borders and religious traditions. There is a story of the wise men. People had been coming to the wise men, complaining about the same problem every time. One day, the wise men told them a joke, and everyone roared with laughter. After a few minutes, he told them the same joke, but only a few of them smiled. When he told the same joke for the third time, no one laughed anymore. Finally, the wise men smiled and said, "You can't laugh at the same joke over and over, so why are you always crying about the same problem?" So these stories put everything into perspective. Once a Buddhist monk came to a flooded river and saw a young woman struggling against the current. Immediately, he jumped into the river and carried the woman across the flooded river to the other bank. A young monk who met him at the bank, next day reminded the monk that he had taken a vow not to touch a woman. "Yes, you're right," the monk replied. "I carried the woman, but you are still carrying her." So from this story, we see, oh, it's not just about outer behavior that shows what one is. It's one's internal motive for acting. That's the final judge. It's what takes place in the mind that determines one's integrity. But that oftentimes lies hidden from the view of others. These moral stories are universal. Sri Ramakrishna's tale of the pundit who couldn't swim was heard by one of our senior nuns, Pravrajika, in the 1970s, when she escorted her old aunt to her Baptist church in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Yes, in Chattanooga, the Deep South. The minister preached it from the pulpit. You all know the story Sri Ramakrishna told. Once several men were crossing the Ganges in the boat. One, a pundit, was making a display of his erudition. He was very proud of his intellect, boasting that he had studied various scriptures, the Vedas, the Vedanta, and the 6 systems of philosophy. And the pundit asked a poor farmer, who was also a passenger, "Do you know Vedanta?" "No, revered sir." "Then 1/4 of your life is wasted." "What about Sankhya and Patanjali's Yoga Sutras?" "No, revered sir." "Then 1/2 of your life is wasted." "Have you read any philosophy?" "No, revered sir." "Then 3/4 of your life is wasted." The vain pundit expounded the scriptures as a passenger sat in silence, when suddenly a storm arose and the boat was rocking and about to sink. The passenger then turned to the pundit, whose face had become very small, and said, "Sir, can you swim?" "No." The passenger then said, "Then your whole life is wasted." He jumped into the water and swam ashore as the boat carrying the pundit sank. Sri Ramakrishna explains to us, what will a person gain by knowing many scriptures? The one thing needful is to know how to cross the river of the world. God alone is real. All else is illusory. In our world traditions, we have parables. How can we get an inkling of God's love, something so otherworldly, through stories and parables? Christ gave the parable of the prodigal son to show what unconditional love is. A man had 2 sons. The younger demanded his share of inheritance and left home. He wasted his substance with, quote, riotous living, and then took work as a swineherd. When he came to his senses, he returned home and threw himself on his father's mercy. The father greeted him with open arms, and he killed a fatted calf to celebrate his return. But the older brother became angry. He was jealous at such favored treatment, upset at the lack of reward for his own faithfulness. But the father said to him, "Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. It was meet that we should make merry and be glad. For this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is now found." In the Hindu tradition, we call this Patita Pavana, Savior of the Fallen. There's a beautiful story that illustrates this divine love in the Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition. Boshi Sen was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, and he was a prominent Indian scientist and agriculturist who worked at the Bose Institute as a protege of J.C. Bose, internationally famous scientist who discovered consciousness in plants. Boshi had a younger brother, Tabu. Swami Pravrajika told us this story. Tabu was loved by Holy Mother, Maharaj, and all the Swamis. But once he did something he felt he should not have done, and afterwards he avoided Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda. He would visit the younger Swamis, but then he would slip away. One day, Maharaj caught him and said, "Tabu, do you know that buffaloes have big horns where flies can sit, and the buffaloes don't feel anything?" Maharaj opened his arms wide and added, "I have big horns like that." Both these traditions demonstrate divine love in 2 different ways. One as unconditional forgiveness, and the other as an expansive, unqualified love wherein we will always feel safe. Parables can teach us about the nature of the world, the bane of lust and greed, the pitfalls in spiritual life, and they can bring philosophical truths into sharp focus. In this connection, Swami Vivekananda once said to Hara Mohan Mitra, "Shelves of philosophical books can be written on each single sentence spoken by the Master." Hara Mohan Mitra was surprised and said, "Is that so? We, however, do not find so deep a meaning in his words. Will you please explain to me any of his utterances in that manner?" Swami Vivekananda, in his fashion, said, "You would have understood had you the brains. Take any saying of the Master, and I shall prove my statement." The friend said, "All right, please explain the story of the elephant god and the Mahout god related by the Master to illustrate his instruction on seeing God in all beings." Now the parable goes, in a forest there lived a holy man who had many disciples. One day he taught them to see God in all beings, and knowing this, to bow low before them all. The disciple went to the forest to gather wood for the sacrificial fire, but suddenly he heard an outcry, "Get out of the way, a mad elephant is coming." All but the disciple of the holy man took to their heels. He reasoned, the elephant was also God in another form. Then why should I run away from it? He stood still, bowed before it, as the elephant driver shouted, "Run! Run away! Run right now!" But the man stood in his place, and so the elephant seized him with its trunk, cast him to one side, and went on its way. And lo, the poor disciple lay unconscious on the ground. Someone later asked him, "You knew the elephant was coming. Why didn't you run?" And the disciple said, "Our teacher has told us that God himself has taken all these forms, of animals as well as of men. Therefore, thinking it was only the elephant god that was coming, I didn't run away." At this, the teacher said, "Yes, my child, it is true that the elephant god was coming, but the Mahout god, the elephant driver god, forbade you to stay. Since all are manifestations of God, why didn't you trust the Mahout god? Why didn't you trust his words?" So Swami Vivekananda at once began explaining the commentary to Hara Mohan Mitra. And 3 days went by. He explained the controversy over the doctrines of free will and predestination, the personal effort in God's will among scholars of both East and West. How in simple language this Ramakrishna parable was a wonderful solution to this controversy. From this parable, we also see how, from the highest standpoint, all is Brahman. But so long as we remain on the relative plane, we must safeguard our spiritual lives from those who are evil-minded or steeped in worldliness, and who by association may harm our spiritual lives. Furthermore, there's a vast difference between those who have realized the truth of Brahman and those who are aspiring to realize it, those who are ignorant of it, and those who scorn it. So with this in mind, while living in the relative world, subject to the pairs of opposites, such as good and evil, we must try to bear witness to the fact that there are also various manifestations of Brahman around us, from the highest to the lowest, and interact with each accordingly. In other words, we must use our common sense and, as Sri Ramakrishna taught, act according to time, place, and circumstance. Such is the spiritual depth, sophisticated philosophical meaning, not to speak of the practical knowledge of this one Ramakrishna parable. We also find stories from mythology. As a young nun, I have to frankly admit, I wasn't drawn to Hindu mythology because its stories were so seemed like fantasies to me, and they were not rational. I was a student. I thought, and with a mind-boggling cast of characters whose names I couldn't even pronounce, let alone spell. But then entered Sri Ramakrishna's oral tradition, handed down to his direct disciples and those that followed. And that slowly but completely changed my mind. I heard from Swami Pravrajika, who had met Sri Sarada Devi and most of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, that Sri Sarada Devi, virgin wife of the Avatar, was recognized by Ramakrishna and the direct disciples as the divine consort of Sri Ramakrishna. And on rare occasions, she referred to herself as Kali, Bhagavati, Sita, Radha, the divine consort of Sri Krishna. So you might stop me right here and challenge. Yes, Holy Mother could be Bhagavati, Sita, and Radha. But how could she possibly be one who has exhibited such sweetness, love, and compassion? How could she possibly be, of all aspects, Mother Kali, the terrible aspect of God the Mother? However, if we read Sri Sarada Devi's life closely, we uncover that aspect as well through various chronicled episodes in her life, including one fantastic story in particular. Harish was a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, who from time to time stayed with the master at Dakshineshwar. However, Harish's wife was disturbed by her husband's spiritual fervor and indifference to his family life. So one day, she gave him a strong drug in order to divert his mind back to the world. But instead, the drug affected his mind. He became deranged and began to act abnormally. Holy Mother noticed this and immediately alerted monks of the Bharanagore Math. But before they could do anything, Harish lost control of himself. Sarada Devi, in her own words, explained the incident. Once Harish came to Kamapakur and stayed for some days. One day, as I entered the compound of our home after visiting a neighbor, Harish began to chase me. He was then insane. There was no one in our house and no place to escape. In a helpless state, I began to walk fast around our granary. He pursued me. Then something happened, Sarada Devi continued. After going around 7 times, I stopped. I assumed my real form, laid him on the ground, placed my knees on his chest, and then held his tongue and began slapping him hard. He began to gasp for breath. My fingers became red. Swami Sarvadevananda, in this regard, said to me, she assumed her Chamunda form. According to some, Mother assumed the form of Pagala, one of the 10 forms of Mother Durga. Swami Pravrajika shared with us, and it's now written in the biographies about the direct disciples. Swami Vivekananda was recognized by Ramakrishna to be from the realm of the 7 sages. Swami Brahmananda, Rakal, the spiritual son of Ramakrishna, was the shepherd boy of Vrindavan. And Sri Ramakrishna told other disciples never to tell him this, to keep it from him, that once he understood from whence he came, he would leave his body. And if you read the beautiful description in the Eternal Companion, his biography, you see at the very end of his life how he had that vision, that he was the shepherd boy of Vrindavan. Swami Shivananda was with Buddha during his life. Swami Yogananda, Arjuna. Swami Akhandananda told Swami Prabhupada himself that he was Yashoda, Sri Krishna's foster mother, in his previous incarnation. Swami Ramakrishnananda and Saradananda were disciples of Christ. We know that when Saradananda entered the basilica in Rome, he went into samadhi. Swami Premananda was a gopi of Krishna and also attendant of the Divine Mother. Swami Abhedananda was with Sri Krishna. Sri Ramakrishna recognized Swami Niranjanananda and Vijnanananda were with Lord Rama during his incarnation. When Sri Ramakrishna, in fact, saw Hari Prasanna, the future Vijnanananda, he immediately recognized him. Though slight of build, Ramakrishna slapped his legs as a wrestler would, challenging his opponent. "Can you wrestle?" Swami Vijnanananda later related, "I was surprised at this challenge. I thought to myself, what kind of holy man is this? But I replied, yes, of course, I can wrestle." Many of the direct disciples worked out in gyms, and so they were strong of build. So Sri Ramakrishna came closer, smiling. He caught hold of my arms, this is in Vijnanananda's own words, and began to shove me. But I was a strong, muscular young man, and I pushed him back to the wall. He was still smiling and holding me with a strong grip. Gradually, I felt a sort of electric current coming out of his hands and entering into me, and that touch made me completely helpless. I lost all my physical strength. I went into ecstasy, and the hair of my body stood on end. Releasing me, the master said with a smile, "Well, you are the winner." Later, Swami Vijnanananda revealed, it was he, Sri Ramakrishna, who conquered me. I have become his slave. When I fought with him, he took into himself all my strength. As a young nun, I well remember the evening. Pravrajika Brahmaprana, the head of our convent, our senior-most nun, left Swami's room after hearing him retell this story of Swami Vijnanananda, and she came to my room. She had asked Swami how such a mythic past life could be true of Swami Vijnanananda, and she divulged to me how Swami had simply told her, "Who can understand the eternal divine play of the Lord?" That simple statement alone, shared in the evening realm, where daylight had sunk into the shadows of dusk, completely upended my incredulity of the mysterious so-called mythological realm of our Ramakrishna Vedanta tradition. It also changed my understanding of our life on earth as we know it, the myth of our personal stories. At one time, Pravrajika Vidyapurana, one of my Hollywood convent sisters, succinctly expressed this illusion we have lived for so many lifetimes. As soon as we are born, we are given a name, a religion, a nationality, and a race, and we spend the rest of our lives defending that fictional identity. Yes, we are born. Events are attached to that name, and that is called our personal story. Our lives are nothing but stories, perpetuated by our memories. And, she aptly stated, that is why sadhus try to erase the deleterious effects of memory and the baggage of the past at all levels of the psyche and be free to be who they are without any baggage of the past. Sadhus therefore sever their attachment to reiterate memories of the past. How? By holding on to a high ideal, to think it, live it, breathe it, and repeat that immersive spiritual process day in and day out. That is how we magically try to transform ourselves. Sadhus generally don't speak of their past. They ceremonially undergo their own funeral service, then repeat their sannyas vows before the fire of Brahman in the presence of other sadhus, which awakens and establishes them with a newer identity as pure consciousness, and a new name which reminds them of the vows they have undertaken, and thereby impresses that identity upon them throughout their lives. Success in life depends upon our internal life. Lay devotees also undergo a rebirth when they receive initiation from a guru. The rest of their life is framed around that moment when a spiritual seed was planted in their heart by their teacher. And from that moment on, as the seed is daily watered and fed by repeating the mantra, an ordinary person is transformed into a spiritual aspirant and eventually into a spiritual being. As the mantra is worked, it generates a powerful lens through which an aspirant views oneself and the world. And so it happens that aspirants begin to forge new stories in their lives, living more in the present and letting go of past memories that no longer seem relevant or even real. Daily spiritual thought and action transform the food an aspirant eats into the Lord's prasad, their spouse and family members into spiritual beings, their job into karma yoga, their thoughts of self-reflection and contemplation, their hobbies inspired by their inner life. They have accepted the truth. That change means letting go of the old false stories they have told themselves. As they begin to narrate their new life, it becomes a story of freedom and change. Change, a movement over time from an unripe ego to a ripened ego, a relationship with God. Freedom of a life lived within the Atman, and the transformative effect that has on one's own life, as well as on those whom one meets. This is how we become blessed and a blessing to others.
Thank you, Brahmaprana, for giving a very interesting talk about stories. So we are very grateful to her to come and just be with us. Thank you, everybody.